All right, ready to dive in. Today we're taking a close look at IndiGo Airlines.
India's largest airline.
That's right, the biggest player in one of the world's fastest-growing aviation markets.
And they've got some pretty ambitious goals, aiming to be a global leader in aviation.
Absolutely, and you've brought us their latest financials and press releases.
Straight from their recent earnings announcement for the quarter ending December 31st, 2024.
So, we've got all the ingredients for a deep dive.
A real snapshot of their financial health, how they're running things.
And we'll get a sense of the challenges and opportunities ahead for them.
Precisely.
So, can IndiGo reach those goals while facing legal issues, rising costs, fierce competition?
Well, let's find out.
All right, first things first, the money.
Always a good place to start.
IndiGo reported a profit of 38.5 billion Indian rupees.
Excluding currency fluctuations, of course.
Got to mention those.
It's a significant jump compared to last year at this time.
Shows the aviation industry is bouncing back after the pandemic, especially in booming markets like India.
More people are flying again, and IndiGo is riding that wave.
That's great to see. But what about those currency fluctuations? What happens when we factor those in?
Well, things get a little more complicated.
I figured as much.
The profit drops to 24.5 billion Indian rupees when you account for the exchange rates.
A pretty big difference.
It shows how things outside of IndiGo's control can really impact the bottom line.
Even when their core business is strong.
Exactly.
A reminder that the numbers don't always tell the whole story.
You always have to dig a little deeper.
Speaking of digging deeper, let's look at their operations.
What's happening in the air?
IndiGo hit new highs, operating a peak of 2,200 daily flights.
And serving a record 31.1 million passengers during the quarter.
That's a lot of people taking to the skies.
It is, and they're managing all of this with impressive efficiency.
That's key with that much volume.
Their technical dispatch reliability hit 99.89%.
Okay, for those of us who aren't pilots, what does that actually mean?
Basically, almost every single IndiGo flight took off on time, as scheduled.
No one wants to be stuck waiting for a delayed flight.
It's crucial for passenger satisfaction, and it really shows how well they run things.
Absolutely. So where are all these passengers flying?
Well, they flew to 89 domestic and 34 international destinations.
A pretty big network.
And they add 54 more international destinations through partnerships with other airlines.
So creating a network of networks, smart strategy.
It gives them a wider reach, more options for travelers.
I bet this impressive growth comes with its own challenges, though, right?
Of course, one of the biggest is the rising cost of doing business.
Inflation hitting everyone.
Even though IndiGo's revenue climbed, their expenses also jumped.
By how much?
Nearly 20%.
Whoa, that's a big jump.
Raises questions about whether they can maintain profitability long term.
You mentioned earlier that they're aiming to be a global leader.
Right.
They'll need to keep a close eye on those rising costs to achieve that.
Absolutely, they'll need to manage those carefully.
Let's break down those costs a bit further.
Okay, where should we start?
Their fleet, they got a mix of Airbus and ATR planes, right?
That's right, a total of 437 aircraft by December 2024.
A lot of planes.
And a good chunk of those are leased, which helps them expand quickly.
But that comes with its own risks if rental costs keep rising.
You're right, their aircraft and engine rentals saw a massive increase.
How massive are we talking?
153.6%.
Wow, that's huge, even for a rapidly growing airline.
Suggests they're really pushing that expansion.
But buying new aircraft is a costly endeavor.
Is.
They're walking a tightrope trying to balance growth with the financial strain of getting those new planes.
Yeah, it's a balancing act for sure.
And it's not just the planes, it's everything else too.
Right, airport fees, employee expenses, even depreciation.
All those costs are going up.
Definitely paints a picture of an industry facing inflationary pressure.
So can IndiGo keep those profits rolling in if costs keep rising?
That's the big question, something they'll need to manage very carefully.
Let's zoom in on that fleet expansion a bit more. They're constantly adding new aircraft.
They are. They even projected a 20% capacity increase for next quarter.
That's incredibly ambitious.
It is almost too good to be true.
What are the potential pitfalls of expanding that rapidly?
Well, one major challenge is infrastructure.
Makes sense. You need the airports to handle all those planes.
Exactly. And even though the Indian government is investing in airport development,
It's tough to keep up with the pace of growth.
existing facilities are feeling the strain.
It's like trying to squeeze a fleet of jumbo jets into parking spaces designed for compact cars.
A logistical nightmare.
And this can lead to delays, congestion.
And ultimately higher costs for airlines.
It's a domino effect. One problem leads to another.
Exactly.
And then there's the issue of finding skilled pilots and crew to operate those planes.
Another big challenge, the industry is facing a global shortage.
Especially for skilled roles like pilots, air traffic controllers.
And maintenance personnel, it's a real talent crunch,
And it's especially pronounced in fast-growing markets like India.
putting even more pressure on airlines like IndiGo.
So we've got rising costs, infrastructure limitations, a shortage of skilled workers.
Quite a few hurdles to overcome.
And on top of all that, we can't forget about those legal and tax issues they're facing.
Right, let's unpack those a bit.
Please do.
The Indian tax authorities are questioning some of IndiGo's expense deductions
Interesting.
and how they've been handling taxes on incentives from aircraft manufacturers.
Okay.
Plus, there are ongoing disputes over taxes on imported aircraft parts.
Parts that have been repaired and brought back into the country.
Exactly.
Sounds complicated.
It is. This stuff can get pretty complex.
What's the potential fallout from all these disputes?
Well, IndiGo says they're on solid legal ground,
But
but these issues could have a real financial impact down the line.
that's a concern.
They could impact ticket prices, limit their expansion plans.
Potentially even affecting the travel experience for passengers?
It's all connected.
It seems even for a company flying as high as IndiGo, there are always some potential storms brewing.
There are always challenges.
We'll have to wait for part 2 to dive deeper into those storm clouds.
We will. We'll explore how these legal and tax challenges, along with the competition in the Indian aviation market, could impact IndiGo's future. It really highlights how IndiGo's success is tied to the bigger picture.
The Indian aviation market as a whole.
Exactly.
So let's connect those dots. Paint me a picture of the current state of Indian aviation.
Okay, well, right now, India has the third largest domestic aviation market globally.
Wow, that's impressive.
And get this, projections indicate it could become #1 within the next decade.
That's a lot of growth.
It is a tremendous amount of potential.
What's driving all this expansion?
It's a combination of factors.
Okay, like what?
Rising incomes, a burgeoning middle class.
More people can afford to fly.
Exactly, and they're choosing to fly more often.
Makes sense.
Plus, the government is making significant investments in infrastructure.
Improving connectivity.
Right, making air travel more accessible to a wider population.
So more people can afford it, and the infrastructure is catching up.
It's a perfect storm for growth.
And IndiGo is right there in the thick of it.
They are capturing a big chunk of the market share with their low-cost model.
Competitive fares, a vast network of routes, makes them a popular choice.
Absolutely.
But it's not all smooth sailing, right? There are some challenges ahead.
Oh, definitely some significant headwinds.
Let's talk about those. What are the biggest hurdles?
Well, we already touched on the infrastructure constraints.
Even with the government's investment.
It's still struggling to keep up with the pace of growth.
Those jumbo jets trying to park in compact spaces.
Precisely. These capacity limitations can lead to flight delays, airport congestion,
And that means,
higher operating costs for airlines.
like IndiGo,
Right?
it's like a ripple effect. One problem feeds into another.
Exactly.
What about the staffing shortages? How are those impacting IndiGo's growth?
It's a critical issue. The industry needs a steady stream of skilled workers.
Pilots, air traffic controllers, the maintenance personnel you mentioned before,
Yep, and there's a global shortage of these professionals.
making it even harder for a fast-growing market like India.
Right.
So we've got infrastructure bottlenecks and a talent crunch.
Two major challenges.
What other obstacles are on the horizon?
Competition,
Always a factor in business.
especially in aviation, and it's only getting more intense.
So a real dogfight for market share.
That's a great way to put it. IndiGo can't afford to relax.
They need to constantly innovate, stay ahead of the game.
Absolutely, and maintain that operational efficiency.
And then there are those legal and tax issues hanging over their heads.
Right. Those could really throw a wrench in their plans.
Potentially costly, both financially and in terms of management's time.
They'll need to navigate those carefully.
So a lot of spinning plates for IndiGo to keep in the air.
Lot to manage.
But even with all these challenges, could there be opportunities for them to emerge even stronger?
Oh, absolutely. Every challenge presents an opportunity.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, take those infrastructure constraints, for example. They're
Yeah.
actually driving innovation.
So
Airlines are exploring new technologies and strategies.
to optimize their use of existing resources.
Exactly, squeezing more efficiency out of their operations.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
It really is in this case.
And that fierce competition we talked about,
It's also a catalyst for improvement.
pushing them to be better.
Right. Enhance the customer experience, offer more value-added services.
Stand out from the crowd.
Precisely.
So it's a rising tide lifting all boats.
The ones who can adapt will thrive.
So we've talked about the challenges and the opportunities.
Just sides of the same coin.
What does this all mean for the average traveler in India?
Well, I think they can expect more choices,
That's always good.
better connectivity to various destinations,
Okay.
and potentially even lower fares as competition heats up.
Sounds great.
But they should also be prepared for some growing pains.
As the industry goes through this rapid expansion,
Exactly, there might be delays, crowded airports.
those jumbo jets and compact parking spaces again.
It's an image that sticks with you.
It does.
But these are short-term issues.
In the long run, things should smooth out.
Right. The investments in infrastructure and the maturing of the market will lead to a better travel experience overall.
I'm excited to see how it all unfolds, but let's bring it back to IndiGo.
Back to our main focus.
They've set some pretty ambitious goals,
They have?
aiming for significant expansion, both domestically and internationally.
That's right.
Give me the details. What are their plans?
Well, they've placed orders for hundreds of new aircraft.
Wow, that's a serious commitment.
It is. They're also exploring new routes, both within India and internationally,
Expanding their network
and forging partnerships with other airlines.
to reach even further.
Exactly.
It sounds like they're going all in on this expansion,
They are.
but growth on this scale is risky.
It is. There are definitely risks involved.
What are some of the things that could trip them up?
Well, expanding too quickly could lead to overcapacity.
If demand doesn't keep up?
Right, and that can put a strain on their finances.
So they need to manage their growth very carefully.
Absolutely. Make sure their infrastructure, staffing, and financial resources can support their ambitions.
It's a high-wire act.
It is.
What factors could really make or break their success?
Well, their leadership team is key.
They need a steady hand at the helm.
Exactly. And they have a strong management team with a proven track record.
So they have the experience and the know-how.
They do, but even the best captains can run into storms.
The unpredictable nature of the industry.
Exactly. External factors like economic downturns, geopolitical events.
Maybe another pandemic.
Right, those things can really disrupt plans.
So no matter how well they manage their own operations, outside forces can still impact them.
That's the reality of the aviation industry.
They need to stay flexible, adaptable.
Absolutely. Ready to adjust their strategies as needed.
Makes sense.
If they can maintain that agility, they have a good chance of reaching their goals.
But what about those legal and tax battles? Could those derail them completely?
It's a risk, a significant one.
Potentially costly, distracting,
They'll need to find a way to resolve those effectively.
to minimize the damage.
Right.
So it seems like IndiGo is at a crossroads,
They are.
aiming for the stars, but facing some serious obstacles.
That's a good summary of their situation.
Their decisions in the coming months and years will be crucial.
They will.
Will they soar to new heights or face turbulence?
We'll have to wait and see.
It's a captivating story, and I'm eager to hear your insights on the broader implications.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Zoom out to the bigger picture.
The future of aviation.
Exactly. What can IndiGo's journey tell us about where the industry is headed?
Okay, so we've seen how IndiGo is doing, their financials, their operations.
And all the challenges they're facing.
But let's zoom out a bit now.
Look at the bigger picture.
What does their story tell us about the future of the aviation industry?
Not just in India, but globally.
Right, the whole world.
IndiGo's journey actually gives us some really interesting insights into the larger trends shaping air travel worldwide.
Okay, like what kind of trends?
Well, one of the biggest is the rise of low-cost carriers.
We're seeing that everywhere, not just in India.
Exactly. Travelers are prioritizing affordability and convenience.
Especially in those rapidly growing economies.
Right, and airlines like IndiGo are perfectly positioned to meet those needs.
It's like air travel is becoming more accessible to everyone.
It is. It's not a luxury for the elite anymore.
More people than ever can hop on a plane, whether for business or vacation.
And that's driving massive growth in the industry.
Particularly in emerging markets like India.
Exactly.
So we're seeing a shift in the center of gravity of the industry.
Asia Pacific leading the way in terms of growth.
What does this mean for the traditional full-service airlines?
They're feeling the pressure.
To adapt.
They can't ignore this shift in traveler preferences.
Adapt or become extinct.
That's a good way to put it.
So they need to offer more competitive fares.
Streamline their operations.
Find ways to appeal to those budget-conscious travelers. But this unprecedented growth brings up another big question.
What about the environment?
Exactly. More planes mean more emissions.
It's a major concern, especially as we try to combat climate change.
A real dilemma.
It is. We want to make air travel accessible to more people.
But we also need to protect the planet.
It's a tough balancing act.
So what's being done to address this?
Well, the industry is exploring a lot of different options.
Like what?
Sustainable aviation fuels, for example.
Made from renewable sources.
Right. Those are promising.
What else?
Advancements in aircraft design.
Making planes more fuel efficient.
Exactly. And maybe someday we'll even see electric planes.
That would be amazing.
It would.
So there's hope for a more sustainable future.
There is, but it's going to take a collective effort.
Everyone needs to do their part.
Airlines, governments, and travelers.
We're all in this together.
We are.
Okay, so we've talked about the rise of low-cost carriers, the boom in emerging markets.
And the environmental challenges.
What about the specific challenges IndiGo is facing?
Like infrastructure constraints, talent shortages, regulatory hurdles.
Are those unique to IndiGo, or are those issues popping up for other airlines too?
Actually, those are common to a lot of airlines.
Especially in those high-growth markets.
Exactly. It's not just an IndiGo problem. It's an industry-wide issue.
So it needs to be addressed on a global scale.
It does. It requires collaboration and solutions that work for everyone.
Governments investing in infrastructure, airlines finding ways to attract talent, regulators streamlining things.
A lot of moving parts.
It really shows how the success of individual airlines is tied to the overall health of the aviation ecosystem.
We need a holistic approach to solve these challenges.
To ensure the industry can thrive long term.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground
We
today.
have a real deep dive.
From IndiGo's financials to the future of aviation as a whole.
It's been a fascinating discussion.
What would you say is the key takeaway for our listener?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the aviation industry is transforming rapidly,
Things are changing quickly.
driven by new traveler preferences, technology, and sustainability concerns.
It's a dynamic and exciting time to be following this sector.
It is, and IndiGo's story is a great example of the challenges and opportunities out there.
A story of ambition, innovation, and a drive to be the best.
Well said.
So for our listeners who are ready to disembark from this deep dive,
I want to leave you with something to think about.
okay, hit us with it.
As technology keeps advancing, how will air travel change in the next few decades?
Interesting question.
Will we see supersonic flights become common?
Maybe even electric planes filling the skies.
Or space tourism for everyone?
Wow, those are some big ideas.
The future of aviation is full of possibilities.
It's up to us to imagine and shape that future.
Exactly.
Well, that's a wrap for today's deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating look into the world of business.